afternoon. Hope you all have had a great morning this morning. I was out on the floor for a little bit. It looks like we had a lot of great meetings going on, a lot of energy in the room, which is something we always want to see. We got a great session for you this afternoon, but before we get into it, I just want to start by thanking our sponsors of today's lunch, Big Time Products and Handy Foil. Thank you very much for supporting our lunch and for all you do for GMDC. A little bit of housekeeping. I'm always going to provide updates in real time. It wouldn't be Orlando if we didn't have thunderstorms and sauna-like conditions outside. And based on the weather forecast, which is calling for a significant chance of thunderstorms this afternoon, we're going to move tonight's dinner inside. So the only thing that's going to change is the location. We were supposed to be outdoors, but we're bringing it in tonight. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to be in this room in the adjoining as well. So just make a note that we're moving dinner inside tonight. And also, I didn't talk this morning, but I do want to call out, in addition to all the stuff that's happening on the CCC floor, for the suppliers especially, if you're out in the foyer area, please be sure to stop by and say hello to the companies that are set up outside in the foyer. This year we've got Ralston Creek Capital, SodaStream, we've got the folks from Ball, and they've got some tasty snacks over there. Repositrack is out front to get you all educated on the marketplace, the GMDC marketplace that we're launching. Anita and Bruce from Possible Conversations. I was told before I came in that a number of the sales impact assessments have already been utilized. We got a few left, so if you're all interested in getting the free sales impact assessment, by all means stop and see Anita and Bruce. Also, our friends at Nielsen are going to be deploying and showing you how to utilize our new dashboard for the Nielsen GM hierarchy. We've got some pretty cool technology. There's a touchscreen out there for you to demo the new Nielsen GM hierarchy. Also, Kodak, the in-store group, and our friends from Kotra, the Korean Trade Promotion Agency, are all out front as well. So by all means, please stop by and say hello if you have a chance. In terms of our business session today, just real quick, for those of you that aren't aware, GMDC, I mentioned earlier this morning, we are a not-for-profit. We are member-owned. And unlike a lot of trade associations that serve our industry, we don't do anything in Washington, D.C. We have no legislative footprint. We do no government relations. We have no initiatives or bandwidth focused on trying to change laws. We rely on all our friends in D.C. to do all the heavy lifting on legislation that favorably affects the industry. So that's not what we do. Instead, we focus all our energy on helping our members connect to growth opportunities in general merchandise and health, beauty, and wellness. And we do that specifically through one of our advisory councils, which is our Education Leadership Council. For those of you that were here on Wednesday night for the SEC dinner, you saw the launch of the GMDC benchmark study that we did in partnership with A.T. Kearney. For those that weren't here Wednesday night, you're going to get a preview of that work tomorrow morning during our breakfast session. So really excited about that. But the benchmark study was done specifically through our Education Leadership Council, and it's work like that that we believe moves the needle for our members' business. Again, we spend no time working on changing the laws. Instead, we put all our efforts focused on changing your business in a positive way. And with that in mind, we've got a great panel discussion today at lunch. And I would like to introduce our 2018 ELC, our Education Leadership Council, our co-chairs, Joanne Leonardi, Business Unit Director from Topco, and Mark Duchel, the President of Navajo Inc. So please give them a hand, and they're going to join me up here on stage.
Right up here. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you've had great meetings so far. I know you have full days ahead of you today and again tomorrow, but it's really nice for Mark and I to get up in front of you. Many of you in this room, and special welcome to our new GMDC members. Most of you probably don't know what the ELC does, or you've heard about it, or you've seen a logo on it, but it is really driven around the needs of you as the members. As most of you already know, incremental growth is really tough to get these days, and much more difficult if you don't have insights and you don't have the help of data and other things to tell you where your business is. One of the real core fundamentals within the Education Leadership Council is to uncover insights, educate, and share them with the industry. And I don't mean just the industry that's in this room, I mean the industry. It's been incredible the amount of attention GMDC has gotten from some of the work that has come out, especially recently. The subjects of the reports that the Education Leadership Council puts out really come from the members, honestly. They come from our retail focus group. They come from insights that we get or questions that we get in from the members. So this is really stuff that you are telling us we need more information about. Our goal really is to ensure our insights and research provide insights and data, but also the so what? What do you do with it? How do you action it? Why do we care? So that's really what we're doing, and hopefully a little of this today is going to share some of that with you. I really want to take a personal thank you to those folks that are here today that are part of the ELC. It is really built with wholesalers, retailers, and suppliers. It is a very collaborative group. We meet every single month, sometimes more than that. And I really want to thank them, and a real special thanks to Mark McKelsey, who drives a lot of the hard work on this group. So without him and the support of GMDC, it doesn't happen, and the support of you. So I just wanted to say a personal thank you. On that note, I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair and friend, Mark Duchel.
Thanks, Joanne, and thanks, everybody. Yes. So Joanne's been leading this charge for about 3 or 4 years now and has done a tremendous job. I'm fortunate to pick up the shoes from the likes of Tom Duffy, Bob Richardson. So I will just encourage everybody, show of hands, who has actually looked at the studies online? Okay. Who knows how to find these studies? Okay. They are online. They are on the GMDC app. I just encourage you to use it. I think every retailer today is asking for manufacturers to bring more and more insights. I think so between the information we have with Nielsen and these studies, I think it's important. We're a mid-sized company, and we live and die by this information. Some of it's unavailable in GM, as many as you know. There's not a lot of information. So I believe, and you're going to hear from our retail panel, their expectations are growing every day relative to what information we can bring. And I encourage you to use these studies to do that. So by way of that, I'd like to introduce our panel real quick. So first of all, our speaker, so here's Brian Owens. So Brian's with Kantar. You're going to like what Brian does. He's done a lot of work to synthesize a lot of information that's out there today that the panel will discuss. Then our panel is made up of 4 people, 2 retailers, 2 suppliers. So we got Greg Parsons with the Kroger Group, Sheri Best with HEB, Rick Radatovitch and Steve Larson with BIC, and American Greeting. Obviously, it's great to have these retailers speak to us. I think you want to hear what they've got to say, and obviously these sponsors that have done such a great job and spent money to help us get there. So some great insights coming here. So with that said, we'll get started with the presentation. Thank you.
How's everyone doing? How's everyone doing? Okay. My name is Brian Owens. I work for Kantar Consulting. I'm here as a partner for GMDC, so thank you very much for having us here. I'm excited about today for a lot of reasons, because retail is changing, the world is changing, and everyone in this room is trying to unlock growth. And what I want to do briefly, because ultimately we want to get the panel up here to talk to the experts really about what, the challenges they're going through, and give you some advice and some recommendations in terms of how to unlock growth. So what I want to do for the next, call it 25 minutes, is highlight these 3 big disruptions, key disruptions here relative to what we're all going through. So as we're thinking about planning, JBP planning, really understanding that shopper, it's important to understand what polarization looks like. That's really about the shopper, the consumer, the who. Then we're going to talk about connectivity. with Amazon, with pure play retail becoming more mainstream and more of the in-store experience shifting online, it's important to understand what that looks like, right? And I have a lens to help you understand that and figure out what those partnership opportunities look like from an interconnected commerce standpoint. And last is about fragmentation. One of the things we talk about at Kantar Consulting is finding growth in uncomfortable places. The days of scale, stack it high, let it fly, are gone. We have to work harder than ever before to maintain our shoppers, frankly, and to understand them, given the fact that there's a lot of choice out there. Which leads to, number one, when we're talking about polarization, the evolving shopper demands. Today's shoppers are empowered. They are empowered economically, personally, as consumers, and as shoppers. They're increasingly demanding more from the brands and their retailers that they shop at. So it's important for all of us to better understand the psyche and the mindset of what motivates them and what they're looking for. Because what we understand to be true is that not everyone is feeling that empowerment equally. And given that polarization I highlighted earlier, there's a lot of fragmentation there. And what I'm talking about is have and have-nots. All right. The old saying of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer is true. The middle class is definitely shrinking. As a result of that, we're also seeing some polarization between young and old. Increasingly, younger millennials, and we're going to talk a little bit about centennials, that Generation Z, are demanding more personalization, hyper-personalization. They're natural researchers. They're data savvy. They want their platforms. Right? But we also know the older shopper base is also struggling as well for solutions. And it varies based on whether or not you're a have and have not. So we need to unpack this. I highlight this framework here because one of the key stats that jumps off this page is that 70% of the wealth is with 41% of the population. So how are we really segmenting our shoppers for our products at our retailer? Trip missions really are harder to really unpack. So if you have one big idea and you just want to scale it, what I would say is pause. We have to look at this data a little bit differently. It has more questions relative to who we're targeting and what they actually need. Because the needs of an underserved population are very different from a young who has a lot of disposable income, who has abundant choice. And increasingly, if you don't give them what they want, they'll look within their peer network to either create it or look globally increasingly so they feel like they're different from others. These are the things that we have to think through. It also leads to challenger brands. And again, there's some data on this page, and what I really want to highlight is that 3%. And that 3% falls extra small brands are growing. And this is data from between 2011 and 2016, and just showing what the compound growth rate looks like. All I'm trying to say here is that challenger brands are becoming more mainstream. And we're seeing retailers make decisions. CVS is a really good example of that. They had store brand penetration goals of roughly between 24 and 25%. But when we look at certain categories, you're seeing more niche brands become that store brand experience for that retailer. So that differentiation is what I'm talking about in that retail experience. That changing shopper expectation. How can I provide an assortment that's so curated, so personal? That's hard for us. That's hard for when we have structured our organizations and our go-to-market strategies around scale. Now we have to market target differently. We have to provide, our supply chain processes are going to change, the shelf expectations are going to change, and the immediacy of demands of how that product comes to us is also changing. These are the things that we're going to talk about as a panel, and I want to make sure you're all thinking through, because how do we all act more like challenger brands is ultimately what I'm saying to say, because that authentic nature is resonating. And that's one of the reasons why Amazon has such great appeal in this aisle, is because there's a treasure hunt experience associated with that. That we all have to take really strong look at ourselves in terms of how we want to reinvent ourselves. Because ultimately, when we think about this polarization, what's really driving the wedge is really about stress. Stress and what the shopper is looking for from our data, from our Shopperscape database, is that folks are looking for stress-free experiences. But how we define that varies. So when I talk about stress-free experiences, it's very different based on whether you're a have and have not. It's also based on where you are from an age standpoint, i.e. why I highlighted earlier the have and have not framework to you. So when we think about what stress-free experiences look like, we have to work harder with the data that we have, and we have to aggregate this information in a way that's hyper-personalized for our shopper base. Otherwise, we're at risk at losing them. And the acquisition cost of getting that back is too high. So we have to work harder to retain shoppers these days. This is the world we're entering into. But understanding the underlying drivers for what causes shoppers to switch to another brand or to another retailer is ultimately what I'm trying to convey here to you. And we're going to talk more about that as a panel. Turning gears a little bit to connectivity. So I highlighted earlier about that polarization. Let's talk a little bit in terms of services. And what the key stat here is that people are spending more on services than on goods. For the most part, everyone in this room sells a product or a good or is part of some sort of the process, supply chain process associated with products. In the old world, that makes sense, but we're entering in the world, given the fact that people are trying to alleviate stress and save time. Time is a new currency. Showing people the trade-offs in time and the value of getting their time back actually matters. It's important that for every $2 of services, people are spending $1 on goods. I'm going to say that again. For every $2 of services, people are spending $1 on goods. It's shifting. We're shifting. So what are they actually buying? One, a little nursery rhyme here, no stuff. Services are growing faster, as I highlighted. Different stuff, so local, niche, what I was highlighting earlier from the challenger brands. Store brands are increasing in quality. So we have a lot more pressure to differentiate ourselves compared to what we were able to in the past, when it was just more of a compare and save equation at shelf. Now we have a lot more considerations that we all have to look at. My stuff, personalization, again, this varies based on the have and have not I was highlighting, as well as the young and the old, but it's important for all of us to recognize personalization. And how can we all become that Coke freestyle machine that's out there relative to abundant choice? One of the reasons Amazon is so popular and continues to grow, it gives folks the ability to create their own experience. And increasingly, how do we make things fun? And the last bit here is their stuff, and this really has to do with store brand and private label. Sophistication has just improved. The quality of the products at the shelf have increased. The pricing as a result has gone up, because now store brand increasingly is driving category growth in certain categories as well. So we have a lot of things that we have to consider relative to what our shoppers are actually buying and how we communicate our messaging of who we are as a brand or as a retailer to them. A little bit of an eye chart for folks in the back of the room, but I'll summarize this really quickly to you. Shoppers are relying on a mix of store and online resources. And what I highlighted here in terms of that bar is that increasingly, the physical store is still a place and a trusted place where people are looking for information, as well as unique experiences. So what does this mean? This means that we have to continue to invest in brick-and-mortar retail. It's not going away. I'm going to say it again. Deep breaths. I love Amazon. I love all of that is great. But right now, we're in a state of transition. We're trying to figure out exactly where we fit in. That's why you're seeing a lot of testing going on. But this slide is supposed to reinforce to you is that the physical store has a strategic place with our shopper, and more importantly, is valued. And the products inside of it are equally valued. And human interaction still matters. It's still about problem solving, helping people find solutions for what they need to alleviate the stress that I was highlighting earlier, right? So if you think the top things on this chart are highlighting employee interaction, shopping to reflect my values. This is hyper-personalized in terms of how people are responding. But they're saying stores are the best at doing this. So there are limitations relative to a digital-first world. One of the challenges Amazon had is building a basket, because people are researching, they know what they want, and they buy it. They're not shopping, they're buying. Stores allow people to browse and to shop. That's why impulse purchases still matter, because sometimes we have to give people things they don't know they need. And that's the role of the store. And what a good example of that is, a question out to the audience is, using Kroger, again, shameless plug to Greg, who's on the panel here, in terms of some of the great work that's going on there. How do we leverage services, again, given the fact that that shift in wallet is shifting to services versus goods, to provide greater coordination of care across the store? This example of the Opt-Up app is a really good example of that. Now, it's good and bad, right, depending on where you are in this continuum and where you are in that basket. But the fact that there's technology there from a health and wellness standpoint that allows a shopper, to empower a shopper to make decisions for themselves as well as their family, is important. It allows them to evaluate what they buy, make a change, which is the hardest part of this whole process here, is how do we drive people to change their behavior that they self-describe as negative or bad. That's ultimately what we're trying to do when you think about that role of stress. And the last is tracking. And that's the part of the algorithm where we have to constantly leverage insights in conferences like this to really understand, are we really evaluating and tracking the right stuff? Because we might be missing an opportunity in terms of a holistic look at our shoppers. But this is a good first step relative to how we need to partner with our retail with the data assets that we have. And number 3, we're still talking about technology. This is a pretty big stat here, and I've been on the mountaintop talking to everyone here as well as with other clients who I work with a lot of you already. But what I'll highlight is this. The average consumer is looking at their cell phone or their mobile device 2,617 times per day. Now, that varies, obviously, based on where you are, and age is a big part of that. But the stat is, based on our research, is that you're looking at your phone unconsciously 2,670 times per day. Now, that presents a 2,617 time opportunity to market and have a conversation with your shopper or with your consumer about your brand. And it's not always about buying something. It's about educating and influencing them. This is a new marketing opportunity. Just putting a commercial on TV, you're seeing a lot more ad spend shifting, but I'm saying trade marketing dollars need to be invested more in store with mobile to have that conversation. So as you go back internally to talk to your brand folks, again, I lived it. I worked at Procter & Gamble. I worked at Reckitt Benckiser. I've worked at Gillette. I've called on Walmart, Target, CVS, Walgreens. I've been in the fight. I understand that negotiation, what that looks like. These are the assets. These are the innovation that's going to move the needle and make sure your SKUs are protected, and more importantly, your shopper is keeping you top of mind. Because as we think about the future is going to be harder. We're now dealing with folks who have kids 0 to 19 years old. They're called centennials. We've been talking about millennials for like 10 years now. What I'm trying to do is get you ready for the future. Because we think about the future of checkout and the future of the physical store, these folks are increasingly driving their parents to make purchasing decisions because they have an ability to navigate technology faster and more deliberately than older generations do, including millennials. So as we're getting ready for that future, are we messaging? Are we marketing? Are we considering key influencers as part of that new purchase decision for the home? That's what this demographic only provides. They're not just young people, they don't buy things yet. What I'm telling you is that was true in the old days, but with technology, they are influencing. They're finding deals. Mom, you're making this decision. I have a 1-year-old at home, and she's already unlocking my phone. It's scary. So I highlight that to you because as we think about this new generation, are we leveraging the right technology? Are we leveraging the right purchasing platforms for them to engage with them when they're not even looking at cable television and they're only focusing on YouTube? These are the things that we have to consider relative to how we communicate. Because the future is coming faster than we expect, and are we prepared for voice commerce? Now, 1% of sales is roughly being bought on voice right now when we think about Alexa and Google Home. But disruption happens every 5 years. So whoever thought that everyone would have a smartphone in their pocket looking at it 2,617 times per day? That happened fast. This is going to happen fast as well. So if you are in GM or you are in health and beauty, this is going to be that trusted resource to evaluate and filter your brand. Understanding the algorithm, we need to start investing in it now. right? Because the role of that store is going to look a lot different when there's a voice device there pointing you in the right direction, evaluating everything that you're doing passively, directly. You know, if you have an Alexa, she's listening to you all day. They might not market that, but that's the truth. So what are we doing now to partner for the future? Bring insights, technology. How are we leaning forward to be able to prepare for this new reality? Because at the point in time when, hey, somebody's looking to a centennial to make that decision for an older boomer, especially when you think about healthcare, it's important for us to understand how our brand fits into that holistic health and wellness profile if that machine is really driving people to what store, and frankly giving you recommendations of how fast you can get it and what the right pricing needs to be. Because still talking about connectivity, interconnected commerce, and again, there's a reason why I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4, because we're going to be asking questions to the panelists based on these specific topics I'm bringing up. Because interconnected commerce, I wish I didn't put interconnected, it's just about commerce. I get frustrated when people say brick and mortar and online because it's really about buying. People are still going to be buying things. That's not going to change. The platform might evolve, but it's still about your brands and how it fits into a choice, whether it's click and collect, the physical store, curbside pickup, Amazon Prime. Doesn't matter. What matters is making sure your product is a part of all these different ecosystems, because if it's not, you're losing credibility with that shopper. That's the case study. That's the ROI that you might not be seeing in terms of, Brian, if I'm in the confections business and I'm not seeing a huge ROI associated with online grocery. What I'm telling you is, you might be right. However, that's a new marketing platform. That's a new consideration. That's what I mean by finding growth in uncomfortable places. We don't know what those key influences are to make people decide. Before it was to be the circular. Now it could be Kylie Jenner talking about it on YouTube. And that's scary for a lot of folks, because how do you centralize your finance? At the end of the day, I have an accounting degree, so I always go back to the P&L. And it's the P&L, it's harder now to place your next dollar and invest your next dollar. What I'm saying is we have to test right now. And you have to let the retailer guide you. And you have to fit into their priorities, at minimum, to decide whether or not what not to do next year. In the world of Amazon, nearly 1/2 of US households have a Prime membership, 45% of the population. 45% of the population, and growing. We do forecasts at Kantar Consulting, and we constantly are missing it because Amazon is growing faster than we expected them to do. And they're not a retail company. They're a technology company first. Always remember that. The reason why they're able to do the things that they're doing is because they manage their ecosystem from a portfolio standpoint, right? So that's why they're able to do certain things that brick and mortar retail are slow to do, because frankly, they're losing money on the retail side because they have a portfolio that allows them to do that. Another challenge, another disruption that we all have to consider. More reason why we have to make sure we're considering all the key influencers for our brand, because one bad review, one bad rating could sink our brands and our retail experience, especially as more purpose-driven retail is being introduced across the world here, relative to the ability to influence and get people enrolled in that social peer-to-peer environment that we're talking about here. And did you know, so to shift gears from Amazon, let's talk a little bit about Walmart. Before Amazon, there was Walmart, right? They're evolving more. I don't know if they're a brick and mortar retailer or a technology company as well in terms of a lot of the investments they're making. But one stat that we have from our data is that 1/4 of all shoppers and 1/3 of Walmart shoppers have used buy online and pick up in store. So they're still coming to the store. That presents an impulse opportunity for everyone in this room, because that phenomenon is just not exclusive to Walmart. It's something that's showing up across all physical stores. Physical stores continue to grow. But the question is, how do we meet shoppers' needs wherever they are? And again, here are a bunch of examples from Target. Their restock program, order pickup, their checkout lanes and their city targets. You're seeing this innovation come across a whole lot. We're seeing it all manifest itself right now in the physical store. There are a lot of different touch points, a lot of different interfaces that we have to consider now. because it's harder to meet that shopper demand. But if we don't, or we don't attempt to do it, the acquisition cost to get them back into our franchise is too high. It's becoming higher and higher as, one of the stats we highlight is that 30% of purchases over the next 5 years will be on auto-replenish. And a lot of them will be in this room. So how are we working hard to be part of that consideration set? Because when that shopper puts it on autopilot, they're shopping for 70% of other stuff now. So the challenge for all of us is how we are part of that 30%. Some people say that number is low. And last is really talking about fragmentation. And no offense to our folks from Nielsen, we work with them, we partner with them, and sometimes they're a competition, but what I will highlight is that our scorecards are wrong. Growth is coming from a lot of different places that we don't, non-traditional places. Did you know that Barnes & Noble sells beauty care? They do, in their glossary format, in their college campuses. Do you know 7-Eleven sells beauty care products? They have their own store brand product that they're rolling out. Growth is coming from uncomfortable places. Home Depot, for everyone in this room, is growing consumables. Are we marketing our brands in the right channels now? Because we don't know what those key influencers are in the future. What I'm highlighting here is that when you look at just a syndicated database, the picture looks pretty declining. Retail is declining. When you layer in some panel data, it's a little bit more positive. And then when you leverage the omni-channel experience, it's a lot more positive. Retail is not dead. And increasingly, brick-and-mortar retail is not dead. The rise of online does not mean the death of brick-and-mortar retail. 80% of sales out to 2023 from our forecasts are still coming from the physical store. That's why you're seeing Amazon invest in physical stores. Amazon Go, Amazon Books. Why the Dollar Channel is growing 900 stores per year. What we're observing is this box is evolving and increasingly getting smaller. So with that fragmentation, that localization matters more. So instead of going to your buyer and doing that central buying decision and scaling across every single store, one of the stats I used to in the drug channel is like the top 1,500 doors do 80% of the sales, right? I'm just using CVS as an example. Why are we trying to get full chain distribution? The question is, we need to make sure our horses are in the right place and working harder for us, because the store space is going to look a lot different in the future, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like with our panelists. But again, we're skewing a little bit smaller. It doesn't mean big box retail is going away either, because what I'm highlighting on this chart is that 100,000 square foot is getting a little bit smaller from that 200,000 square foot footprint. It's still there. It's just that space in the store is going to look a lot different, especially when shoppers are spending more money on services. So a framework to understand the future, and again, I'm not going to go through all of this. If you want to understand where your brand fits into this framework, this is something I put together and I've been working with clients to really understand where we're going, and more importantly, where you want to position yourselves. What I'll say this is that the evolution of the box is changing. And what we're seeing in the role of the store, it's moving from more of a showroom to a fulfillment center. All right? I'm sure everyone here can nod and agree that's what we're feeling. But it's also understanding how your product fits within that sort of consideration of necessity versus discretionary. Now, if you're on a discretionary standpoint, price is not necessarily part of the equation. It's more about how that brand fits into my lifestyle. But there are 4 things that we all have to consider, and I'll leave you with relative to the evolution, that we still have to do well. One is value leadership. That changes by channel. In Kroger, it could be high-low, right? It could be EDLP in the market in certain formats as well, given the fact that they have a wide range of banners, or it's EDLP. But increasingly, it's less about price and more about that individual's price for how they live their life. Frictionless experiences. That's mobile, that's omni, that's digital, but it's still part of the physical store too, relative to education. And the last 2 have to do with product expertise and problem solving. Ultimately, we all want to get to a place where we're problem solving. So these are things that I want you to consider, but where we're actually going is where the online and the offline experience work together, okay? Where retailers are looking for help driving online conversion, but still offline trips. In logistics, technology, and data, that's going to be differentiating our products and our experiences more than ever before. You know, the stuff that goes in, the inner workings of our business process are things that we have to consider more. So we're here to talk more about the research that we've done and partnered, you know, and I'm going to welcome our panelists up on stage. You know, from a front-end standpoint, from a future outlook, here are 4 things or 5 things here I want you to consider. The future role of checkout presents a challenge to impulse categories. It's depending on where you play, there's an opportunity for you, but there's still an opportunity at checkout. So that's not going away. Shoppers are increasingly embracing mobile payments. So how they buy, and that's equally as important as how data is being used. And then there's a huge opportunity to engage, as well as we have to be more flexible relative to formats. And the last one is technology. We have to find a better way to integrate technology in the physical store. You know, there's some best practices here if you reference some of the research that we've been highlighting here, but there's 6 best practices. We'll talk a little bit what that looks like on the panel, because I know I'm up against a little time here, but there's 6 of them. Think broader, local, your sight lines matter, so those adjacencies, modular and non-food, how do we bring that into the equation relative to that consideration? It's not necessarily helpful, but healthy brands as well at checkout, as well as having that balance between health and wellness. And the last one is think technology. So the key takeaway is we have to use retailer data, definitely, to identify the heavy front-end shoppers and really, really make sure they're taken care of. Again, this is not new news to everyone in this room, but it's important for us to revisit that because in the new world we're going with loyalty and hyper-personalization, we got to get those folks right. It's not about acquiring new, it's about maintaining what we already have and then expanding. It's a different way to engage. So with that, what I would love to do is welcome our panelists up on stage, and we're going to talk through some questions here relative to the topics I introduced today, and more importantly, what we talked about in our research. Come on up, folks.
Good job.
All right.
I like being.
All right, everybody. So I said a lot, right, relative to this disruption that we're all dealing with. What I would love to do first before we jump into the question was, let's just go down the line, folks. You can introduce yourselves briefly, and what's your initial reaction for what I just, what I put out there to the audience?
Perfect.
We'll start with you, Sheri.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Sheri Best. I'm with HEB. I've been with HEB for 24 years across many different parts of our organization, store operations, through our strategy loyalty team, where we work through a lot of this information, and most recently, the last 2.5 years back in general merchandise, running some of our commodities there. So I think my initial reaction is this is all stuff that we've all been thinking about. And as we go through all of the information today and all of the questions, I would encourage you not to think as a retailer and as a vendor. I would combine those two together. Vendors need to be thinking like retailers, and retailers need to be thinking like vendors. Now more than ever, we have to partner, and we've got to come together and share ideas and share information in order to make this successful for everybody.
Excellent.
Hi there, Steve Laserson. I am with American Greetings. I lead our sales division. I spent better part of the last couple decades with American Greetings. And my reaction, I think again, much of what we're hearing, we have all heard. It helps to hear it through different perspectives. I would encourage us, though, to make sure a lot of these things are being stated in generalities. They apply very differently by category, and not every headline means the same thing to each category. So we really have to peel the onion back and think about, well, that's true in general, but is that true for me and my category? Is that true for me and my retailer in this aisle? So I do think there are really important nuances that can get lost in those headlines.
Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Parsons, and I've been with Kroger for 32 years, and I'm in charge of all of home GM for Kroger, based out of our Portland, Oregon office. So many people don't know we have both a Cincinnati office and a Portland office, so yay, Portland. I think what I thought, when I listen to presentations like this, it really reminds me why I love retail. We're problem solvers. We are constantly trying to look into our crystal balls and figure out how we are going to best attract the customer. And I think that more than anything, this is the most exciting time in retail. And I feel like the opportunity for really connecting with the customer, driving sales, it's never been greater. And so I'm excited by a lot of what you shared.
Good. Rick?
Yeah, Rick Radovitch. I'm with BIC. I've been 31 years with the organization. A director of sales for our food channel. When you see all this information, it's quite overwhelming. It can be daunting. But I agree, though, with the panel here that it comes down to putting our heads together collectively, leveraging ingenuity and creativity, and it's challenging, which does make it exciting. So I think ultimately it's about collaboration, it's about transparency, and I think if we use those techniques, we can be successful in overcoming the challenges.
Excellent, excellent. So let's just jump in. First question I'm going to have to Sheri here. How do we stay ahead of the evolving shopper?
Good question. So my first answer to that is about trend. And normally when we think about trend, we're thinking about product trend. I would take your mind to not just product trend, but think about trend and how the customer is shopping and what the customer's needs are and what their wants are today. So if we think about trend differently, there are 5 or 6 things that I think come to mind. First of them is time, convenience, localization, personalization, the channel the customer wants to shop, and lastly, relevancy. How relevant is that product to the customer? And when I think through that, you think about loyalty of our customer. So we're constantly working on how do we retain loyal customers and how do we gain new loyal customers. If you look at all of those different planks and you hit on every single one of those, you're likely going to retain your loyal customers and you're going to gain new ones if you're focused on really what the customer needs and wants are. I've got a saying that I always like to explain to the team, and it's, your father probably spent 30 minutes to save $5. You and your children probably will spend $5 to save 30 minutes.
Very good. Steve?
So for us, I think it's staying in touch with the evolving consumer is a lot about having a really longitudinal view, at least in our category. You can't just react to the latest trend, the latest headline, but having this longitudinal view of our consumers and then driving an R&D agenda against that to stay ahead of the consumer, particularly with millennials. What we find is you can't chase millennials because you found out their new thing and you got to go. Now you have to be credible to them. You have to be ahead of the curve with them by staying in touch with what's driving them, doing the R&D and testing that with them so that by the time they get there, you're already there ahead of them. And I'll use as an example for us, the quest for millennials started over a decade ago when most people were saying, oh, those kids will never buy cards. We're a greeting card company. We said, they better buy cards. We better figure out what it's going to take to have the brands that resonate with them, the assortments that resonate with them, and to make our category relevant for them. So we invested heavily in understanding them before anybody believed they would ever buy cards. And we did a ton of R&D, and we failed a lot. And that's the way we got to, I think, we're there with Gen Z now, doing the same thing. It's a different question. Same question, it's going to be a different answer.
Right. Greg, I'm going to ask you this question, and then I'm going to ask you the loyalty question. So how are you the evolving shopper? What is BIC doing?
So BIC is really looking at a lot of different factors, but it starts with shopper insight. So we're doing a ton of research on shopper insight to understand exactly what's the expectation. And as we learn these understandings, it's about applying those to our products. Personalization is becoming important, and it's being everywhere the consumer shops. So one of the things that we know is that in a lot of cases you have click and collect, you have in-store, you have delivery, and making sure that we're in all those aspects. It's obvious, but in some cases we aren't there, so that's a focus for us.
Very good. Greg, as we think about how the shopper journey has changed, Kroger has a lot of data, 8451, a lot of great work that your organization is doing. And what are the new loyalty tactics that you're using with all that data? And again, I'm kind of teasing something here, but I want to really understand where Kroger is going relative to loyalty,
Right.
Both from an asset standpoint and from a shopper standpoint.
So it's been mentioned a couple of times up here. Personalization is really the expectation of the customer now. It's not even something that they hope for. It's really something that they expect. And Kroger works with, you mentioned 8451, who really is our scientists around data. We work really, really hard to harness the very rich data from our loyalty program. and really, really personalize precise offers to as many customers as we possibly can. At the same time, it's a huge initiative for Kroger. We're going through and we're doing Kroger Restock, which you've heard a lot in the trades. We're touching 600 stores a year, and the whole goal around that is really to take a look at the overall store and make sure that it's right for the division, make sure it's right for the district, right for the city, the neighborhood, and even sometimes it's even the corner. We are working extremely hard to make sure that the assortment is tailored by store to the shoppers who are shopping that store. And it's really, I believe that work is what's going to drive and continue to drive our loyal customer.
Sheri, HEB localization is part of your offer. Leveraging data in a similar light, what sort of things is HEB doing to retain that shopper, leveraging data insights relative to loyalty programs that you guys
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So a couple of the examples that I can use are our Saturday screenings that we're doing for our customers in store, and just connecting at store level with our customer with kids events, community events, really staying in contact based on what's going on in that specific region. So we do that completely individualized by store and localized by store and region.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so we talked a little bit about the shopper. Let's talk a little bit about fragmentation, given the fact that growth is hard to find these days. So I'm going to start here with Rick. You know, we think about the underserved community. So I highlighted earlier about the have and have not, right? Now let's talk about this more from a data standpoint. What are the things that BIC is investing in, given the fact that we highlighted earlier, and the research highlighted this too? So 94, or was it?
So 94% of consumers expect to find lighter at the front end. And that's an insight that is certainly a valuable component, especially as you want to serve every community. So BIC is really about being everywhere, every place, every time, and leveraging these insights. And as we try to go deeper into understanding the underserved community, it's really just ensuring that it's visible, and we are visible out in front, and in essence leveraging what our core competencies are. And I think it really comes down to one thing, and that's just making sure that if we get as much insight, we can build that into a plan and bring it to our retail and wholesale partners and really drive change.
Along those lines, Greg, if we think about the recommended opportunities, so if we're talking to this audience here relative to partnering with Kroger, you know, which categories is Kroger prioritizing specifically at the front end to differentiate itself to the balance of, call it, grocery?
Well, right, you know, the front end is changing so fast.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about Scan Bag and Go, Use Scan. So many of our formats are quickly shifting to Use Scan, and that front end experience is it's under fire. And I know for a lot of our suppliers, it's really it's quite frightening because of the volumes that go through there. We're really taking a look at each of those spaces and looking at them differently. Some of them are from a category management standpoint instead of just individual items. What kind of experience are we providing the customer? Some of the areas we're looking at from a health and wellness standpoint, really trying to connect the final experience in our stores to our overall mission, which is feeding the human spirit. So there is a lot of insight that's going into that to make sure that we're making the front-end experience of today as aligned as possible with our mission, and trying to minimize the impact of the front end of tomorrow.
Very good, very good. We have a lot more to talk about, so we're going to just jump right into the call services. Given the stat I threw out there, for every $2 that a shopper is spending on services, you're spending $1 on goods. So that wallet, that share wallet, is shifting. Given that phenomenon, and again, we'll start here, Steve, relative with American Ingredients in terms of product availability. Your model is very different. Greeting cards is a very different model compared to a lot of folks in this room. So we think about product availability. How do you think about that relative to your brand in terms of the emerging shopper platforms? What are you doing to innovate and, more importantly, lead in this area?
So this is one of those places where I said you'll hear a headline. The headline would be that e-commerce is about the endless aisle.
Right.
But the store is about curated assortments. E-commerce is about the endless aisle. I believe in our category, it's exactly the opposite. the heavy shoppers who like to shop for cards really appreciate the tangible experience in store. They like selection, they need selection. When they're in a click and collect environment, when they're in an e-commerce environment, we need to curate for them. We need to fundamentally change the shopping experience for them. So we're thinking very differently about what e-commerce means in our category. It also may be about bundles, which is something that doesn't really exist.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about what bundles could look like.
So there's just really different product formats that we're finding that resonate with the e-commerce or click and collect shopper. And it's just a fundamentally different expectation that they have when they come to their phone or their tablet or their computer as it relates to our category. That's just that's really, really different. So it may be that they want to stock up. And if they're in the store stocking up, they're going to take the time to find the right card for occasions they know are coming up. It's their sister's birthday, they have a wedding. If they're stocking up online, it's about just getting something they can stick in the box and be ready for a sponsor. They don't know who it's going to be for, so they shop very differently. They want cards that are easy to read and digest online, and they can let somebody from Instacart or Shipt or Kroger or H-E-B go pick it out for them. It's a very different experience. So again, I'll come back to my point, which is I think category by category, we have to think differently about the challenges and the opportunities the e-commerce presents.
So Steve mentioned something that was pretty important. There's an aspect of curation, but there's also a trust factor relative to allowing somebody to make a decision for you, whether that's an algorithm or actually a store manager or a store employee who is going to help navigate you through that experience, whether it's via your mobile experience or whatnot. I want to make sure that resonates with folks because that's a pretty important, where we're headed from a future standpoint is critical. Rick, let's talk a little bit about, at the core, it's about joint business planning. We're partners here. You can't do it alone. It's something I always emphasize relative to working with clients. You can't work in isolation for your brand. When we think about BIC relative to partnering with a Kroger, with an H-E-B, how are you better fitting into their priorities as a company?
Well, first it starts with transparency, and that's making sure that we're all aligned to the same objectives and goals. And I think once we establish that, then it becomes down to what we classify as a true category management approach. We want to be a trusted partner and valued in our insights, and I think if we leverage those things, that builds trust and confidence. It allows us, I think, then to integrate more closely and ensure that, hey, all the aspects of front-end management from the standpoint of all the way from operations to execution are aligned. And I think it comes down to that, and then it becomes resource deployment.
Excellent. To our retail partners here, what's one thing that you wish your brands would do a better job of relative to working with both of you? You can start here, Craig.
This year we actually launched a process that many other retailers do, and we've been holding vendor supplier summits. This last year we rolled out a pretty robust merchandising strategy, and we had a big ask for everybody to come in and really listen to our strategy and then go back and figure out exactly how they are going to fit into the strategy and really satisfying the needs of our core customer. The most important thing that a brand can do is really listen to those objectives, provide really, really good feedback and direction. We can pull data all day long, but we really need thoughtful insights into how to drive the overall objective of connecting with the customer, driving sales, and what have you. We need suppliers to provide as much guidance as they possibly can, but also at the same time, we need extreme honesty. We need to be told that if in fact there are risks involved, my expectation is that a supplier is going to step up and say, you better be watching XYZ because it's going to be important for you to manage it.
That's, again, pause. Being able to say no purposefully, I believe in the negotiation to build credibility is as important. Again, my days as a sales guy, I probably said, no, I can't do that. And it would be amazing how many times I got the phone call when something else didn't work well. So I think that's really important for folks to hear. Sheri, from your experience, what are the things that you would love to see more of from your brand partners?
Absolutely. So I'll echo a lot of what Greg said, and I think that he is right on every one of those points, but I want to take it one step a little bit deeper in understanding who the customer is.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when we have meetings and strategy sessions, we see the VPs and the directors, but we don't see the guys that are in in our market and should be in our market every day. So we have a very unique market in Texas, and it's a unique customer by store and by region. So I think it's important, one, that you hear the strategy and how we're doing that with different customer segments, but then you truly go experience what that segment looks like and how they shop in our stores, because it's very different. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
So what I hear from that is execution matters, right? So you have the greatest brand idea, somebody did some great basis testing, and you tested it great. But at the end of the day, the feasibility and execution matters equally. So enrolling people in the local communities and to your pitch probably matters as well. Great points. Let's shift gears to interconnected commerce, okay? And I think this one in particular, I would like, Sheri, let's start with you first, relative to what are the new points of influence for your shopper?
All right, so a couple of those. I'm going to talk quickly about path to purchase, and I think path to purchase is going to be your most important piece. And that ties back to how the customer shops, where they shop, when they shop, and how they want to receive the goods. And we've got to make sure that we're understanding that customer and understanding which channel they want to shop in. And I'll talk a little bit more at the end today, but I think it's very important that you realize that some shoppers are only shopping in a single channel. And they may have given up on brick and mortar or no longer going into brick and mortar, and they're simply looking at one of the e-commerce channels. So I think we need to take a deeper look into that and make sure that we're truly providing the customer the experience they want to receive, in the channel they want to receive it in the time they want to receive it, and give them the personalization and the product that they want to receive. An example of that, if you're a baby customer, I want to be able to show you baby type products. If you're a single mom with a dog, we want to be able to talk to you about your dog and your dog products. So I think it's getting very personalized again.
Excellent. We're up against some time, so what I'm going to do is the last question is ultimately at the core of the research and why I'm here today, is to kind of make sure everyone understands this. The future of the center store and front end, and specifically checkout lanes. What I would love to do is, I want everyone to respond to these two questions, or a version of that, right? So we'll start here with Rick, and we'll end with you, Sheri, relative to repurposing space within the store, especially at checkout. I've done a lot of work with you guys relative to insights, and then optimization of assortment. Like, I'm really, 4 Ps and enhancing store productivity. What are the things that BIC is doing in these areas at checkout?
Yeah, certainly. So as it relates to checkout, and in particular self-checkout, there's certainly an opportunity as it relates to the right assortment. And it comes down to a couple of things. Number one is the insight. So as I mentioned earlier, 94% of consumers expect to find lighter at the front end. The second thing is about incrementality. So the assortment, especially at self-checkout, you have limited assortment. So it's about true incrementality. So is that 20th candy bar really bringing incrementality? Probably not. So it's making sure that we identify those incremental items.
It tastes good.
And then last, and probably most importantly, is about the sales velocity and profit margin. And I think those things all are what we're in business for, is to certainly make money and drive sales. And one thing about our particular product line is that it takes 4 king-size candy bar sales to equal the profit of 1 BIC lighter. So I think all those are important, and that's why I think it's this category management approach, efficient assortment, and identifying to the incrementality of what these items can bring are most important to the front end.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I just talked about front end, but the front end is it's the last line of connection with the customer, and I believe that there are a couple different things that we can really work on. One, we have to drive sales. That space has to drive sales, and I do think that we have to meet customer expectation, but that expectation, we also have to understand where the customer is going and the customer that we're trying to grow is going. So we want to be very, very mindful of those assortments. The check stand is an amazing place for personalization. It's an amazing place to offer localized products, which is, I believe, critical in almost every single market that we operate in. So I think that it's going to become a touch point where we're really going to be able to continue to place our stamp on the customer experience.
Thank you, Greg.
So when it comes to sort of celebration products, and I'm going to be careful, I warned against the dangers of generalization,
Yes,
but given the time, I'm going to generalize. Boomers, for the most part, when it comes to, baby boomers that is, when it comes to an occasion, they tend to think, okay, it's someone's birthday, I got to get a card, they're going to make a beeline for the department, they're going to find the right card. So it becomes about making sure we have the right assortment, localization, all those things come into play in the department. Millennials, when you talk to them at somebody's birthday, they don't think card, they think celebration. And a card can be a part of that celebration, but they're looking for ways to really stand out. They might be going to Instagram first to find out, oh, what can I do for someone's birthday, or what might I write on the card? We're doing a lot of content marketing to drive before they even get in the store. When they think it's somebody's birthday or it's a wedding, what are the things that they can be doing? In store, brands like Papyrus really resonate with millennials. So what we're doing is things like the wine bags and the candles and the entertaining products that can go with the celebration. By the way, you could get a card for that celebration as well. And we're finding that they're bundling significantly, but that stuff has to be on the perimeter of the store. They're not making a beeline for the card department looking for that. They're on the perimeter of the store looking for celebration ideas.
Excellent, excellent. Bringing solutions to the front of the store. Sheri, let's end with you.
You got it. So I'm going to take this just as an assortment perspective, and I want you to think about assortment a little bit differently. Today, how many of you have your vendors in the room? How many of you have all of your retailer apps that are out there? Let me see a show of hands. A few, and that's pretty much the response that we get across the board. So you got to think a little bit differently about the box compared to what's happening in e-commerce. So as you're sending vendor partners into the offices to talk to our BDMs, how do you think about, they're not only talking about the four walls anymore. The walls are not getting smaller, but the assortment inside the walls have to change. But what are the other assortments they need to look at as well? How many of them are going on to see what your product looks like on the e-commerce site? Is your brand showing up there the way you wanted it to show up? Are you looking at things, if you walked into a store and you saw, and I won't give a specific example, if your product did not show up in the store the way you wanted to show up, you would probably let us know about it. But are you doing that same thing in e-commerce? And if you're not, I highly encourage you to do so you can look at your product online and is your brand showing up like it should show up? And then come back and give us feedback so we can make sure that that online experience is equal to the in-store experience as we continue to figure out what type of assortment goes online versus what type of assortment goes in the four walls.
Excellent. I want to thank our panelists today. They did a great job. I learned a lot, so let's give them a round of applause. And what I want to take away here is pretty important relative to the future of the front end. I want to reinforce the message, brick and mortar is not dead. However, we have to work harder. And I think what our panelists did a really good job is giving you specific, actionable things that they're working on with you to really make that experience a lot different and more stress-free. At the end of the day, it's about solutions and bringing more people into the conversation relative to marketing and really engaging. I share Greg's enthusiasm. Retail is a place to be. We have to make this sexier to attract younger people and folks into this industry because ultimately this is a study of why people do what they do and changing their behavior. So I'm pumped, happy to be here. Thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.